The first visit, the twin suns were sinking behind the jagged hills when Ethan trudged back toward his small cabin. His hunting bag was only half full, but his mind wasn't on food tonight. He had been hearing strange noises for the past 3 days, faint voices like whispers in the wind, coming from the forest ruins near the old trading path. Most people in the colony avoided that area. It was said to be haunted by shadows from the last war between humans and the alien race called the Trellin. But Ethan was not the type to believe in ghosts. If there was a sound, there had to be a reason. That evening, curiosity won. He took a different trail, moving quietly between the tall, black-barked trees. The air was cooler here, carrying the smell of damp soil and burnt wood. He stopped suddenly. A faint cry, small, weak, reached his ears. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. Ethan's heart jumped. He followed the sound until he saw what remained of an old hut, its walls broken and roof half gone. Inside the shadow of the ruins, 2 figures crouched close together, an alien woman and a little girl. The woman's skin was pale blue, almost silver in the fading light. Her hair, long and dark, was tangled and dirty. She held the child close, her arms wrapped protectively around her small frame. The girl's big eyes glowed faintly, like the stars just beginning to appear. Both of them looked thin, too thin. Ethan took a careful step forward. "Hello," he said softly. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes were sharp, suspicious. She shifted her body, putting herself between Ethan and the child. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said quickly, raising his hands. "I live nearby. I just heard a sound." She didn't answer. Ethan's gaze dropped to the ground beside her. A small, empty container, the kind colonists used for water. It was bone dry. His stomach tightened. They hadn't had food or water for days, maybe longer, without another. He reached into his hunting bag and pulled out the cooked meat he had planned for his own dinner. He set it on a flat stone near the doorway and stepped back. The little girl peeked from behind her mother's side. Her small nose twitched at the smell. The woman's grip tightened around her, but Ethan saw the child's hunger in her eyes. "You can have it," Ethan said gently. "Please, you need it more than I do." For a long moment, they stayed frozen like statues. Then, slowly, the woman reached forward, took the food, and placed it in the girl's hands. The child bit into it. Eagerly, her small teeth tearing at the meat. Ethan turned to leave. He didn't want to scare them more. But as he stepped into the trees, a small voice called out, high and soft. He glanced back. The little girl was looking at him, her mouth still full. She didn't speak again, but her eyes, they weren't afraid anymore. Her mother quickly pulled her close, hiding her face again. Ethan walked away, but his chest felt strangely heavy. That night, lying in bed, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 2 faces, one fierce and guarded, the other young and innocent. Who were they? Why were they hiding here, in the ruins? And who had burned their home? The colony's past with the Trellin wasn't a peaceful one. Many humans still carried anger from the war. If others found them here, there was no guarantee they would be shown mercy. Ethan sat up in the dark. His cabin was warm, his food stores decent. Meanwhile, out there in the cold forest, an alien mother and her child were trying to survive with nothing. It wasn't right. By morning, his decision was made. He packed more food, a flask of clean water, some bandages, just in case. When he reached the ruins again, the 2 were still there. The woman looked more tired than before, her back against the wall, her eyes half closed. The girl was awake, watching the door like she was waiting for someone. When she saw Ethan, her face lit up. Her mother tensed immediately. But Ethan simply set down the bundle of food and water in the same place as before. "I'll come back tomorrow." he said quietly. The girl leaned forward, but the woman pulled her back again. Ethan could almost feel her fear. She didn't trust him, not yet. As he turned to leave, the wind shifted, carrying a faint scent. Not from them, from somewhere else. He froze. There on the edge of the clearing, a broken branch, the kind that snaps under a heavy step. Someone else had been here. Watching Ethan didn't let it show on his face, but his mind sharpened. Whoever it was, they knew about the mother and child, and that meant time was running out. Daily gifts. Silent Trusty then returned the next morning with a larger bundle than before. The suns were barely above the horizon, sending soft golden light through the forest. His boots made almost no sound on the damp ground, a habit he had learned from years of hunting. When he reached the ruins, the little girl was already awake, sitting on a flat stone outside. She was holding a stick and tracing shapes in the dirt. The moment she spotted him, her eyes brightened. But the woman, Lyra, he would later learn, stepped outside behind her. Her face was tired but alert, her eyes narrowing as soon as they landed on Ethan. He placed the food and water on the same stone as yesterday. "It's fresh," he said softly. "Cooked this morning." The woman didn't answer. She kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder as if she expected Ethan to lunge forward at any second. The girl reached for the food, but Lyra shook her head. She waited until Ethan stepped back, giving them space before letting the child eat. Ethan stayed. A little longer this time. He leaned against a tree, pretending to check his hunting knife, but in truth, he was watching the edges of the clearing. He couldn't forget the broken branch from yesterday. Someone else had been here. When the girl finished eating, she looked at him again, shy but curious. She tilted her head and pointed to the knife at his belt. "It's for hunting," Ethan explained, kneeling so he wouldn't seem so tall. "I use it to get food." The girl whispered something to her mother, who shook her head quickly. But the child's eyes stayed fixed on him. Ethan smiled faintly. "Show you how." Lyra's eyes narrowed further, and for a moment Ethan thought she would tell him to leave. But instead, she simply picked up the empty flask and handed it back. It was a small thing, yet it felt like a sign. She wasn't throwing it away. She was giving it back so he could fill it again. The next day, Ethan brought bread and a bit of fruit along with water. He noticed Lyra's hands trembling slightly as she tore the bread for her daughter. Her arms were marked with faint scars, some thin and white, others still fresh and red. He didn't ask about them, not yet. Instead, he started talking about small things, the weather, the animals he'd seen, the nearby stream. He didn't expect answers, but sometimes the little girl would giggle softly or mimic the sound of an animal he described. Lyra still kept her distance, but she was listening by the 5th day. Something changed. When Ethan arrived, the girl was waiting just inside the ruined doorway. She stepped forward before her mother could stop her and took the food directly from his hands. Lyra said something sharp in her own language, but the girl only smiled and handed the meat to her mother before running back to Ethan. Ethan laughed quietly and handed her a small piece of fruit. She took it and bit into it with delight. It was the first time Ethan saw Lyra's face soften just a little as she watched her daughter. But Ethan's unease hadn't faded. Each day, he found small signs. A fresh footprint, half hidden in the mud, a faint smell of smoke far from any human home, and once, a broken arrow lodged in a tree not far from the ruins. Someone was watching. He didn't tell Lyra. He wasn't sure if she already knew, but the way she often glanced into the forest while eating told him she suspected. On the 7th day, rain poured from the sky. Still, Ethan went. He wrapped the food in cloth and walked through the mud until he reached the ruins. He found Lyra trying to keep her daughter dry under a half-broken roof. Both were shivering, without thinking. Ethan removed his own coat and placed it over the girl's shoulders. Lyra's eyes widened in surprise. "Why?" she asked, the first word she had spoken to him in human language. Ethan paused. "Because she's cold," he said simply. Lyra stared at him for a moment, then lowered her eyes. She didn't return the coat, not that day. That night, Ethan sat by his small fire, sharpening his knife. The rain had stopped, but the forest outside was full of dripping sounds and shifting shadows. He thought about Lyra's question. Why? Because leaving them out there alone felt wrong. Because the girl's smile made him forget the colony's bitter history. Because every time he walked away, a small voice in his head told him they might not survive the night. The next morning, Ethan arrived earlier than usual. But as he approached the ruins, he slowed. The clearing was too quiet. The girl wasn't outside. Lyra wasn't in sight. Ethan set down the food and listened. No movement, no voices. Only the sound of leaves shifting in a faint breeze. Then, from somewhere deep in the trees, he heard it, the sharp snap of a branch. Not far away this time, Ethan's hand went to his knife. His eyes scanned the shadows, and for a second, he thought he saw a tall figure vanish between the trees. He turned back to the ruins and saw Lyra in the doorway. Holding her daughter close, her eyes filled with fear. Ethan's pulse quickened. This wasn't just about hunger anymore. Someone was coming for them. Shadows in the forest. Ethan stood in the clearing, his eyes fixed on the dark space between the trees. He could feel it. Someone was out there. Watching Lyra's grip on her daughter tightened. She whispered something in her own language, and the child buried her face in her mother's side. Ethan forced himself to speak calmly. "Stay inside. Lock the door. It can lock." Lyra's eyes narrowed, but she stepped back into the ruins without arguing. Ethan moved toward the forest edge, his boots sinking slightly into the damp ground. Every step was quiet, deliberate. He scanned the shadows, looking for movement. The forest here was dense. Thick, black-barked trees stood close together, their branches weaving into a dark ceiling that let in little light. The air was cool, almost cold, and smelled faintly of smoke. He stopped. There, a faint glint, like metal catching a stray ray of sunlight. Ethan crouched low. The glint vanished, replaced by the shape of a tall figure moving between the trees. Whoever it was, they were skilled, almost silent. Their steps blending into the forest's natural sounds. But Ethan had been a hunter for years. He could hear the difference. The figure was circling. Ethan didn't chase. Instead, he stepped back into the clearing, making his movements obvious. If the stranger wanted to watch, then let them watch. He went to the stone where he usually placed the food and set it down just like every other day. The silence felt heavier now. He could feel unseen eyes on his back. Lyra reappeared in the doorway, her face tense. "You should not come here anymore," she said in a low, firm voice. It was the most human language she had spoken so far. Ethan met her eyes. "If I don't come, what happens to you?" "To her." He nodded toward the girl. Lyra hesitated, then shook her head. "It's too dangerous. They will find us. They will hurt you." "They?" Ethan asked. She pressed her lips together. "Hunters." The word was sharp, almost spat out. And it sent a cold feeling through Ethan's chest. The girl tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering something. Lyra knelt and whispered back quickly, her voice urgent. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but the child glanced at him, eyes wide, before turning back to her mother. Finally, Lyra stood. "You should go. Today." Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." Before she could reply, a sudden snap echoed through the clearing. Closer this time, Ethan's knife was in his hand instantly. His body turned toward the sound, his senses sharpening. From the tree line, a tall figure emerged. He was alien, the same species as Lyra. His skin was darker blue, almost slate, and his eyes glowed faintly yellow. Armor plates covered his chest and shoulders, and in one hand, he held a long blade that shimmered with energy. Lyra stepped in front of her daughter, her voice low and filled with anger. She spoke in her own language, the words rapid and sharp. The warrior answered in the same tongue, his voice deep and mocking. His gaze shifted to Ethan, narrowing with something between curiosity and contempt. Ethan didn't understand the language, but he didn't need to. The meaning was clear. This was no friendly visitor. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice steady. The warrior tilted his head, as if deciding whether to bother answering. Then he spoke in broken human speech. "Not your concern, human. Step aside." Ethan didn't move. "She doesn't want to go with you." The warrior's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Not her choice. Not yours." He took a step forward. Ethan shifted his stance, holding the knife low and ready. "Then, it's my problem." The warrior laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You think you can stop me?" Ethan's grip tightened. "I can try." The warrior's blade moved slightly, catching the light. Lyra's voice rose in warning, but Ethan didn't back down. The two stood facing each other, the air thick with tension. Then, without warning, the warrior stepped back into the trees. His movements were slow, deliberate, not retreating, but leaving a message. This isn't over. Ethan waited until the forest swallowed the figure before lowering his knife. When he turned back, Lyra was still holding her daughter close. Her eyes locked on him. "You are a fool," she said, her voice shaking. "But, thank you." Ethan knew the man would return. And next time, he wouldn't come alone. He also knew something else. He wasn't going to walk away. He glanced toward the trees one last time before speaking. "Tomorrow, I'll be back. Be ready." Lyra stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to push him away or hold on to him. She didn't answer, but when Ethan left the clearing, could feel her eyes on his back until he disappeared into the forest. That night, the forest around his cabin felt different. The shadows were deeper, the wind sharper. Ethan sharpened his knife and checked his old hunting rifle, the one he hadn't used in years. If they were coming for Lyra and her daughter, they'd have to get through him first, closer than strangers. Days after the first attack passed in a strange rhythm. Ethan still brought food every morning, but now he stayed longer. He would sit near the doorway, talking quietly while Lyra listened in silence. Sometimes she answered in short sentences, her human words slow but clear. The little girl, Sira. Ethan had finally learned no longer hid behind her mother. She ran to meet him, grabbing his hand and pulling him toward the stone where he always set the food. She laughed more now, a bright sound that made the cold ruins feel warmer. One afternoon, Ethan brought a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside was a tiny wooden figure of a bird, its wings spread wide. "I made this for you," Kay said, handing it to Sira. Her eyes lit up, and she clutched the carving like a treasure. She spoke quickly in her own language, showing it to her mother. Lyra's expression softened, but her gaze lingered on Ethan for a long moment. They started sharing meals. At first, Lyra refused to eat until Sira was finished, but Ethan would split the food so both of them had enough. Slowly, her hands stopped, trembling when she reached for the bread. Some evenings, Ethan brought his small cooking pot and made soup over a fire near the ruins. Sira would sit close, breathing in the smell with excitement, while Lyra kept her eyes on the forest edge, always watchful. Ethan noticed it too. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. The forest was too quiet some days, and more. Then once he found signs that didn't belong to him, a bent twig, a footprint. The faint smell of smoke far away. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lyra finally spoke of her past. "They took my mate," she said in a low voice, staring into the fire. "He was a fighter. He did not return from the last war." Ethan stayed silent, letting her speak. "The warlord wanted me, wanted my child, said she would be his to raise as his own. I refused." Her hands clenched tightly. "We ran, but he sent hunters." Ethan had guessed most of it already, but hearing it from her made the danger feel heavier. The bounty hunter who had come before. He was only the beginning. "I won't let them take you," Ethan said firmly. Lyra looked at him, her eyes unreadable. "You already risk too much." "Some risks are worth it," he replied. The next day was bright and clear. Ethan decided to take Siro to the nearby stream to fetch fresh water. At first, Lyra refused, but after seeing Ethan's patience with the child, she agreed, as long as she came too. The walk was quiet, except for Sira's chatter and the sound of rushing water ahead. At the stream, Sira laughed as she tried to catch small silver fish with her hands. Ethan crouched beside her, showing her how to cup her palms so the fish wouldn't slip away so easily. Lyra stood nearby, watching them with an expression Ethan couldn't quite name. When Sira finally caught a fish and immediately let it go, she ran to Ethan, splashing water on him. His laugh startled Lyra, who blinked as if she hadn't heard such a sound in a long time. That night, the bond between them felt different. Lyra didn't just watch him, she spoke to him, asked about his home, his work, even the scars. On his hands, they weren't strangers anymore. Not really, but the shadows in the forest hadn't left. On the 10th day since the first attack, Etho was returning from a hunt when he saw it. A scrap of cloth snagged on a thorn bush near the ruins. It was deep red, stained darker in places blood. He crouched, his stomach tightening. The weave of the cloth was not human-made. He knew who it belonged to. When he reached the ruins, he didn't show it to Lyra immediately. Instead, he looked around, searching for fresh tracks. There, just beyond the trees, half hidden under fallen leaves, the clear print of a heavy boot. Lyra must have seen his expression change. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan handed her the cloth. Her face went pale. "They're close," she whispered. Sira clung to her mother's leg, sensing the tension. Ethan knelt, so he was at the child's height. "It's all right, I'm here." But even as he said the words, he knew things were about to change. The hunters weren't just watching anymore. They were getting ready to strike. That night, Ethan stayed outside the ruins, keeping watch. The moonlight made the forest glow faintly silver, but the shadows seemed deeper than before. Every sound, every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made his hand tighten on his knife. Lyra didn't sleep either. She sat beside Sira, her eyes fixed on the forest. When their eyes met across the dying fire, Ethan could see it clearly now. Trust. It wasn't complete, but it was there. And maybe something more. They weren't just two strangers he had decided to help. They were becoming his people. And he would fight for them, no matter what came next. The last attack came at dawn. Ethan had been awake since before the sun rose, the cold air sharp against his skin. He had spent the night listening to the forest, every sound testing his nerves. Somewhere in the early hours, the silence had changed. It wasn't the peaceful stillness of night. It was the quiet of predators waiting. He was crouched near the doorway of the ruined hut when he heard it, a faint scrape of metal. Then a rustle that didn't belong to the wind. "Lyra," he whispered, turning his head. "Wake her. Stay behind me." Her eyes widened, but she obeyed, shaking Sira gently until the girl stirred. Ethan moved forward, knife in one hand, his old rifle slung over his shoulder. He stepped into the clearing, scanning the shadows. That's when the first arrow hissed past his head, striking the stone wall with a sharp crack. They came fast, 3 of them. All alien warriors like the first bounty hunter, but armed with more than blades. 2 carried long spears tipped with glowing points. And the third, taller than the rest, held a short-barreled weapon that hummed with dangerous energy. Ethan fired once with his rifle. The shot struck one attacker in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, but the alien roared and kept coming. Lyra's voice rose behind him, not in fear, but in fury. She had grabbed a broken wooden beam from the hut and swung it with surprising force at the nearest warrior. The blow landed hard, knocking the alien back a step. Sira cried out, but Lyra pulled her behind her and stepped forward again, ready to fight. Ethan reloaded quickly, firing again. This time the shot caught one attacker in the leg, dropping him to a knee, but the leader kept advancing, his glowing weapon aimed straight at Ethan's chest. Ethan dove sideways as the weapon fired, the blast tearing into the earth where he had just been. Dirt and smoke exploded upward, the smell of scorched ground filling the air. The fight closed in. One spear thrust came, so close that Ethan felt the wind of it pass his face. He caught the shaft with his free hand, twisting hard until the alien lost his grip. Then he slammed the butt of his rifle into the warrior's jaw, sending him crashing to the ground. But the leader was faster. He reached Lyra, striking her across the side with the back of his weapon. She fell to one knee, gasping, but kept herself between him and Sira. Move. The alien snarled in his own language, shoving her back. Ethan didn't think. He charged, tackling the leader with all his weight. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the dirt. The alien's strength was brutal. Each blow felt like it could break bone, but Ethan fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. He drove his knife upward, the blade sinking between the armor plates at the alien's side. The warrior let out a roar of pain and staggered back. The wounded attacker tried to retreat toward the trees, but Lyra grabbed Ethan's dropped knife and threw it with deadly aim. It struck the alien in the throat. He fell without another sound. Ethan turned in time to see the leader raising his weapon again. "No!" Lyra shouted, rushing forward. She slammed into him, knocking the weapon aside just as it fired. The blast hit a nearby tree, splitting it in two. Ethan took the opening, pulling his rifle's trigger one last time. The shot struck the leader square in the chest. His armor cracked, and he crumpled to the ground. The clearing fell silent. Only the crackle of burning wood from the damaged hut and the faint moan of the last wounded attacker crawled into the trees and vanished, broke the stillness. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, his body aching from the fight. Lyra was on her feet, one arm around Sarah, her other hand pressed to the bruise on her side. "You're hurt," Ethan said. "So are you." She replied, glancing at the blood on his arm. They stared at each other for a long moment. There were no words for what had just happened, for the fact that they had fought side by side, protecting the same child, risking everything for each other. Ethan finally spoke. "This can't go on. They'll keep coming." Lyra's eyes were dark with worry, but she nodded. "I know." He looked at Sira, who was clinging to her mother's side, still holding the little wooden bird he had given her days ago. "They'll keep coming," Ethan repeated, "unless you stop running." Lyra's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Ethan said, voice firm, "you come with me. Both of you. My home is safer than this. I can protect you there." Lyra hesitated, glancing toward the forest. "If we go with you, they may follow." "Then let them follow," Ethan said. "I'll be ready." For the first time since he had met her, Lyra's guarded expression softened completely. She didn't say yes, not yet, but she didn't say no either. And in that moment Ethan knew the decision was already made. Come live with me. The forest was quiet again. Too quiet. The bodies of the fallen hunters lay still, their weapons scattered in the dirt. The morning light broke through the trees, touching the scene with a strange calm that didn't match the chaos of moments ago. Ethan stood with his rifle, hanging loosely in his hands. His chest rose and fell with slow, steady breaths. The fight was over for now. Lyra was kneeling beside Sierra, checking her arms and legs for any wounds. The little girl was shaken but unhurt. When she saw Ethan, she reached out to him. Ethan crouched, and Sierra threw her small arms around his neck. "You came back," she whispered in her own language. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he understood the feeling. Lyra watched him for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Finally, she stood and met his gaze. "They will send more," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know. That's why you can't stay here." Lyra crossed her arms. "We have nowhere else to go." "Yes." "You do?" Ethan said firmly. "With me?" Her brow furrowed. "Your home. Is it safe?" "It's safer than this," he replied. "And it's not just walls and a roof. It's somewhere I can protect you." Lyra's eyes searched his face, as if trying to see if his words were just kindness or something deeper. She looked down at Sarah, who was still holding the small wooden bird in one hand. Sarah tugged her mother's sleeve. "I want to go," she said softly. Lyra hesitated. She had spent months, years, running, never trusting anyone, never staying in one place too long. To stop now, to let someone else guard her and her daughter, meant letting go of control. But when she looked into Ethan's eyes, she didn't see pity or fear. She saw something she hadn't seen in a long time: trust. They left before midday. Ethan carried most of their belongings, which wasn't much in a small pack. Lyra kept Sarah close as they moved through the forest. The path to Ethan's home was narrow, winding between tall black-barked trees. Birds called from above, their voices bright against the quiet as they walked. Ethan glanced back often, checking for any sign of pursuit. He saw nothing, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. Lyra noticed. "You don't relax much, do you?" she asked. Ethan gave a small smile. "Not when people are trying to kill my friends." The word friends made her pause. She didn't correct him. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a small clearing. Ethan's cabin stood in the center, sturdy, built from thick timber, with a stone chimney and a wide front porch. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. "This is it," Ethan said. Lyra took in the sight silently. It wasn't grand, but it looked warm and solid, a place that could hold out against more than one storm. Sierra ran forward, climbing the porch steps and peering inside through the half-open door. She laughed when she saw the shelves lined with jars of food and the thick blankets folded neatly on a bed. Inside, Ethan set down the pack and showed them where they could sleep. "You can take my bed. I'll make a space near the fire." Lyra frowned. "You don't have to." "I want to," Ethan said simply. She didn't argue. That evening, they ate together for the first time inside his home. The fire crackled, filling the room with warmth. Sierra curled up in one of the blankets, her eyes heavy with sleep. Lyra watched her daughter for a moment before speaking. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Ethan looked into the fire. "'Cause no one should have to fight alone. And because, he hesitated, then met her gaze. "Because you matter. Both of you." Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere far off, a faint boom echoed, maybe thunder, maybe something else. But inside, the cabin felt steady, like the center of a storm that couldn't touch them. For the first time in a long while, Lyra let her shoulders relax. She rested her hand lightly on the table, and Ethan placed his over hers without thinking. she didn't pull away. Later, after Sierra was asleep, Lyra stood by the window, looking out at the dark forest. "They won't stop," she said quietly. Ethan joined her. "Then we won't either." She turned to him. "We." He nodded. "If they come again, they'll find both of us standing here, and they'll regret it." For a moment, they just stood there, the firelight warm behind them, the night deep and endless outside. When Lyra finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Then, we will stay." Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. "Good. Welcome home." She didn't smile exactly, but the way her eyes warmed told him it meant more to her than she could say. That night, as Ethan lay near the fire, he heard Sierra's quiet breathing and Lyra's faint movements as she settled into the bed. The cabin, once silent and empty, now felt alive, and somewhere deep in the forest, unseen by them, the ashes of a burned-out hunter's camp smoldered. But for now, they were safe. Together,